If you're a beginner having a tough time with color, you're not alone. Most beginners do. Let me try to make it easy. Let's begin with the color wheel, which is really a great tool. There are three primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. And the reason they're primary is you have to buy them. There is nothing on earth that you can mix together to make a primary color. The neat thing about the primary colors is there's only 4 possibilities of mixing. You can mix yellow with red, red with blue, or blue with yellow. That's the only color possibilities. But there's also the possibility of mixing yellow, red, and blue. And that's pretty neat too. We'll get into that later. If we take any 2 primary colors and mix them together, we're going to get a secondary color. For example, if you mix red and yellow, you're going to get orange. If you mix yellow and blue, you're going to get green. And if you mix blue and red, you're going to get purple. So there's only 3 secondaries: orange, green, and purple. So we have 3 primaries and 3 secondaries, and that's all the hard stuff there is to know. There is another group of colors between each primary and each secondary, and they're called tertiaries. And they're not particularly important because they're kind of obvious. But let's go over one of them once quickly. It's kind of obvious that if we mix orange and yellow, we're going to get a color in the middle: orangish yellow. We don't have to mix orange and yellow. We can mix red and yellow and just use a whole lot more yellow than red. Along these same lines, we can mix any color we want between the primaries by just mixing the primaries. So again, if we have the 3 primary colors, we can make any color of the rainbow, no exceptions. Let me introduce the idea of complements. Every color has some other color that is exactly across the wheel. For example, green is exactly across the wheel from red. Purple is exactly across the wheel from yellow, and blue is exactly across the way from orange. Those are your major complements. There are other complements. There are an infinite number of other complements. For example, a yellow-green is exactly across the wheel from a red-purple. Every color has its complement. Let's take a look at why that's important. We're going to begin this demonstration of complementary colors using the red-green complement. And the reason I'm going to use the red-green complement is that green is the only secondary I have on my palette. So there's some green. This is a weak color, and this red is a very strong color. I have 2 reds. It doesn't too much matter which one I use. There's my red. Let's just take a little of this red and mix it with a little bit of green, and look what's happening. It's almost black. It is black. Complements have the ability to neutralize one another. And in fact, that goes not only for red and green, it goes for all the complements. If this isn't a perfect black, that's because this is not an exact complement of this, but they're close. So the first thing is, all complementary colors have the ability to neutralize each other. That follows from something simpler than that, and that is that if we start with a yellow, and then add a blue, well, we use this one, that'll make a fantastic green. add a blue to that, we get a green. And now if we add a red, oh, well, we have some red already here. We add it into that green, and we have neutralized it. We can neutralize it all the way or part of the way. What happens here is that we can make a neutral or a semi-neutral. Why do I call it neutral? Why don't I call it black? Well, because really, we don't want black. We never want black. We'll do that in another lesson. But I'd like to show you here, let's get some fresh water. Let's do this on this piece of scrap paper. Let's paint, first of all, some of this green. We'll do this again. Let's take this red. I think that might be a more perfect complement. Well, let me first get some red there. There we go. There's some red. And now we'll just run these together. And there you have the neutralizing effect. We can have a semi-neutral green. We can have a semi-neutral red. I guess you'd call this a brown, and this would be an olive. I want to do this one more time now. I want to do this with, let's say, a lot of yellow, thick yellow, a lot of blue. This is incredibly powerful. This is the strongest blue on my palette, so a lot may not be too much. There's a green. Let me show you the color just by thinning it out over here. It's definitely a green. It's kind of looking dark there just because there's so much of it. Now let's put a red in there. Look what I've developed. When we thin it out, we can see that it's a greenish shade, but we can always add a little more red into there. Well, now I've shot it into the red shade, but that's okay. We can fiddle with it here until we have an extremely neutral color, a near black, right? Or even a black. The difference between doing it here and doing it here is pretty interesting. If you mix a color over here, like this, paint it on the paper, you get something fairly dull. We've got a, look at that, we've got probably a true gray there. But there's nothing very interesting about that. If you look at what's going on in here, it's extremely interesting. It gets quite pretty when you have all of these different colors not quite mixed, but close. And so we get all these marvelous washes in here. One thing I want to be careful of is getting dirt in my yellow. But look at these beautiful colors that I get by mixing on the paper and not mixing on the palette. Beginners always like to mix on the palette. Beginners are worried about hitting the exact color. And of course we can do that. But I feel that mixing on the paper is a much better alternative. It produces gorgeous washes. So now we've learned that we can neutralize any complement, any red-green complement, blue-orange complement, purple-yellow complement, we can neutralize all of the complements, including the tertiary complements, but we can also make semi-neutrals. And we've learned that the reason we can neutralize complements is that all three primaries together produce a dark. They neutralize each other. Finally, let's take a look at a problem that we're going to have in real life. And that is that when you take a red, this is really a slightly purplish red. Let's call it a rose. And let's take this red over here. This is an orangish red. Not too easy. I'm going to try to make it a little darker so you can see that. Orangish over here. Oh yeah, that's showing clearly in the monitor anyway. And this purplish red here, they are different, definitely different. If I wanted the perfect red, whatever that might be, I could mix them together in whatever proportion I wanted to get any red I wanted precisely. And of course the same goes for blue and yellow, but I'm just going to show you the blues. Here's a very purplish blue, and here is a very greenish blue. This is so strong, I got to be careful with it. You can see the difference very clearly there. It's certainly both blue, but somewhere in between may very well be the perfect blue that you're looking for. So we can do that. We can mix any blue in between. The same goes for yellows, and you can see it here on my palette. One of them is a lemon or greenish yellow, and the other is an orangish yellow. Here's our greenish yellow. Here is our orangish yellow. Somewhere in between we can get a yellowish yellow, and of course we're playing color wheel here. Got an orange, a green, and brush paint's dirty, but a purple. Again, by mixing them on the paper, you can get some gorgeous effects. Look what just happened. I'm going to let this dry, and we'll look at it a little bit later and see what really happens when you do mix it on the paper. Well, here's our painting and it's dried. Let's have a look. Look at that marvelous, interesting stuff. Let's go take a look at that color wheel we painted. Oh, wow. Is that gorgeous? Isn't that effect in there? Wow. I just love this. Let's go up and look at that other portion. My goodness. There's a gray. There's so much color in that gray. It's hard to figure out what it is. Isn't it beautiful? Look at this area here. Wow. None of that would happen if you mixed that on the paper. Oh, we have a special treat over here. Look at this guy in here. That sort of thing just happens if you trust watercolor to do its thing and don't worry too much about it. Marvelous, marvelous things. Now that you have a general idea about mixing colors, let me recap this in a very logical order. To begin with, there are 3 primary colors. That would be enough to do everything with, except that there's no such thing as a perfect color. For example, here's a spectrum going from greenish blue to purplish blue. I defy you to find the spot in the spectrum that's the true blue. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2, in the real world, there's no such thing as perfect. The colors that manufacturers supply us with are far from perfect.
If you look at this spectrum here, you see that this is a green substance, but there's a lot of other junk in there besides green. And that's just what we have to accept. So the way we handle that is to buy a blue that's a little on one side and a little on the other side. And now with two tubes of blue, one slightly greenish, one slightly purplish, we can mix any color at all in the blue range. And so we go with a red that's a little off to either side and a yellow that's a little off to either side. And you can make every single color there is beautifully, easily.
This is called the dual primary palette, and it's used in industry where almost is not allowed. Here's how we actually work it. If you try to make an orange out of a greenish yellow and red, then the green component in the yellow is going to neutralize some of the red and give you a very dull orange. Also, for the same reason, if you try to make an orange out of a purplish red and a yellow, then the purple component of the red is going to neutralize some of the yellow and also give you a neutral orange. However, if you mix an orangish red with an orangish yellow, you will get a beautiful orange, the sort that you could use in flowers. Now we can mix any of these colors with water,
so when you paint it out, it's a tint. It's more pastel-y, it's lighter than it would have been. A red would become a pink. You can also neutralize them and bring it to a gray. You can paint your paint down really thick and get your colors very intense and neutralize them, and you can even have a black. We've also learned that if you mix your colors on the palette, you can be very precise in your color mixing. And if you mix them on the paper, you can get some dramatic and gorgeous effects. And that's about all I can tell you about color on the beginner level.